Hi, I'm Paul McGowan. Thanks for joining me today. Well, let's see what we got. My stack of envelopes grows smaller. Let's see just what's in here. All right. Darren from Wilbraham, Massachusetts writes, Paul, I was curious to learn the best and easiest way to set up a subwoofer crossover into the room with simple tools like a test tone disc and a dB meter. That's a reasonable question, but I have to tell you, I have never found meters and test tones of much value when it comes to setting up a subwoofer. I instead would prefer to use my ears, and I think it's probably appropriate we go through some of the setups to installing a subwoofer, which is anybody that watches my channel or reads my daily posts, Paul's posts, knows I am a big fan of subwoofers. I think they are a necessary component in a stereo system to bring full realism into the system. So the first thing I would remind us of is that a properly operating subwoofer makes no sound of its own. And by that, I mean, obviously, if it's on, it's going to be making sound, right? But a proper subwoofer helps the main speakers sound as if they have bass. Now, if your subwoofer draws attention to itself, if you're sitting there listening and you hear the woom woom, you've got it too loud, you have it placed poorly, any number of things. Maybe the crossover is turned up too high in frequency. But whatever you're doing, it's wrong. So what you want to do is have enough level with low enough frequency, and that's how high the subwoofer goes, so that the main loudspeakers appear to have more bass and be full range. We shouldn't notice the subwoofer. As I've said in any number of papers and videos, I prefer two subwoofers, left and a right. If you don't have that, then one will do. But that's always a little problematic because we have to take the left and right channel information and put it into the subwoofer. Now, if your subwoofer is a true mono subwoofer, meaning it has one input, you're going to have a problem combining left and right channels together. If you try and do that with a Y connector, you're going to screw everything up. You don't want to do that, okay? Do not use a Y connector, because essentially what you're doing is you're forcing the left and right channels of your preamplifier or your DAC together, and that'll cause trouble. Trust me, you don't want to do that. So either your subwoofer, in the case of a single subwoofer, has a separate left and right input that within the subwoofer electronics is able to combine left and right channels into a mono signal without interfering with the performance of the preamp, then you're always better sticking with a left and a right if you can. Now, that said, let's just use one subwoofer as an example, and I'll tell you a neat trick. Positioning the subwoofer is important. Usually, in the case of one subwoofer, we'd want to place it kind of behind the main speaker, sort of off to the right. And I prefer the right, though at low frequencies it shouldn't matter. But I prefer that because in a orchestral setting, the right side of the orchestra is typically where you'll see the bass-heavy instruments. But other than that, it's completely up to you. But here's a neat trick. If you want to find the best place to put the subwoofer, you can take the subwoofer and place it on the listening chair and then play it. As you're playing it, walk around the room behind your loudspeakers and find the point where the bass is smoothest, where there's no big peaks or dips or suckouts. And that point, as you're walking behind and the subwoofer is facing you sitting on your listening chair, you'll find a place that it works really well. That's the point. Mark that spot, because that's where now you're going to flip everything around and place the subwoofer right there. And then when you're in the chair, it's going to be perfect for you. So that's a little trick that you can do with a subwoofer. Now, once you have that set up, then the next challenge is to try and figure out how you're going to feed it. So typically, subwoofers have both high-level and low-level inputs. By high-level inputs, I mean speaker cable inputs. So the output of the power amplifier can go into the subwoofer's inputs, where it doesn't take any power, but when it does that, but then it's R'd down and you get the signal. Now that's my preferred method of doing it. And the reason is I want whatever sound comes out of my power amplifier, whatever character of tonal balance, whether I have a tube amplifier or a solid state amplifier, I'd like that same tonal character and performance to be duplicated into the sub. So by taking the output of my power amplifier, I get closer to that ideal. Not every subwoofer has that possibility, and therefore you have to run low-level signals, i.e. the output of your preamplifier or DAC. Now the problem with that is it certainly works, but now you've got two long cables, one that I'm assuming is going from your preamp or your DAC to your power amp, and another set going over to the subwoofer. Two long extensions of cables, depending on their length, can bog down a preamplifier, and you won't get the best sounding performance out of that. So one of the things you can do, if you have one long set of interconnects going to the power amplifier, at that point, take a Y connector and tap off of that input to where that goes into the power amplifier, run a short set of interconnects over to the subwoofer. Those are a couple of good tips that'll help you, but again, my preference being speaker level inputs, but not all subwoofers allow that. So those are some good setup tips for you, none of which involve a test tone, because test tones are really tough unless you have a fairly sophisticated system to where you can really tell what's going on that isn't the room, that isn't the subwoofer. My recommendation is simply use your ears, keep the subwoofer, just keep turning it up and the frequency low until the speakers, the main speakers, sound like they have all of a sudden acquired a lot of good bass, but never coming from the subwoofer itself. The moment that happens, turn the subwoofer down. Hope that helps. Thanks. This is a great question. Appreciate you asking.